All right, well, let's get into our panel. It's been another busy news week, both locally and internationally, from the restructuring of the ANC's Gauteng and KZN leadership, the Spaza Shop registration deadline, to AfriForum Solidarity's visit once again to the United States. Then, of course, there was, who can forget, the screaming match between the US and Ukrainian presidents at the Oval Office. Well, we'll speak to political analyst Sinet Solomon. We're joined by Institute for Global Dialogue senior researcher Mikatekiso Kubai, Stellenbosch University business management lecturer, who's also a political party brand analyst, Dr. M.K. Zwagala, and joining us in studio on this conversation is SANEF Deputy Chairperson and TUT journalism lecturer, Mr. Chamano Makadi. Guys, thank you so much. A good evening to you. And yeah, we're really looking forward to getting into this discussion. Of course, remember that you're more than welcome to be part of it as well. Give us a call. 010-594-6010 072-110-5584. That number at the bottom is for sending WhatsApp text messages, and it can be a voice note as well. We'd love to hear your voice. So let's get into it, because there's been a lot to look at. I think that just looking at, I suppose, the news cycle, I think, Chamano, we can start with you. Yeah. Those that really, for you, really stood out, and certainly was the buzz in the various newsrooms and in conversation with editors across the country, those that stand out for you.
No, of course, you know, in your own words, the screaming match, you know, with President Trump and President Zelensky. Look, completely unprecedented that you would see something like that in the history of America, you know, democracy. But of course, Trump is Trump. Something that really bothers one when you think of some of the words coming from a, you know, a leader who hold such a powerful position. Yep. When you start talking about Third World War, was that even necessary to even go there? I would dare say leaders really have to think twice before they speak. Yeah, I think that certainly is one of the ones that stands out, and we're going to bank that one for later, because the images and certainly the global conversation that's sparked by what happened between Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office, the exchange of words, they're very interesting. But let's perhaps start with some of our own local politics, Sinet. Thanks for joining us. A busy week for us as well, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts on the moves that we've seen happening from the African National Congress. It's been a big week for them. Gauteng, KZN, two of their most important provinces, and what they've done is they've reconfigured the leadership there. Keen to hear what you make of who they've put forward as really taking the party to the helm in the province. So you've got Jeff Radebe, for instance, as convener in KwaZulu-Natal, and then you've got Amos Masondo in Gauteng. Is this the right? Are these the right provincial task teams that we're seeing put forward here?
I think that the ANC is not really spoiled for choice. I think at this point in time, it is more of a recycling of leaders, but also trying to take those who are less tainted. So I think in terms of KZN, this might be the best option that they had. But I think in terms of Gauteng, there are other alternatives that they could have looked at, people who are obviously more popular within the province. And I think that would have impacted them more positively in the run-up to the 2026 local government elections. But I guess that the party also needs to prioritize what the party line is. And I think that having chosen these individuals and these individual task teams, I think that that is what they considered would be best for them. But I don't necessarily think that it will translate in the results that they actually want.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting, because there's something to be said about having leaders that have experience and you know, some skin in the game. And Dr. Zwagala, perhaps this is where we bring you in here. Just even the very branding of some of these individuals. Amos Masondo, for instance, who's the convener for the provincial task team in Gauteng, was the mayor of Johannesburg for 10 years. That's a long-standing period. Is that a good, you know, front-facing positioning for the party? And then also having him work alongside Panyazali Sufi, who really doesn't necessarily leave the realms or the helm of power, but shares it with Masondo.
Good evening, Neledi, to colleagues and the viewers, and safety to the victims of the floods in KZN. Look, I think a drastic repositioning strategy was eminent post the election last year. Is it a drastic move? I don't think so. For instance, the dynamics in KZN are vastly different from those of Gauteng. Remember in 2019, I think the ANC won the election there by 1% or less. In KZN, there's a new phenomenon, which is the MKP. So I think with a party that has lost 14 to 15% of the vote, a drastic brand repositioning is necessary. And that has to do with the people that are really the face of the organization. So, however, there's nothing wrong with the ANC when it draws from its strengths. You know, for instance, the likes of your Jeff Radebe, really a statesman. I don't recall anything that was controversial or during his tenure in justice. And as you mentioned, Neledi, in Gauteng again, I mean, if you draw on the wells of sources of value or reputable individuals in the face of Masondo, I think the party has the right to do so. Is it a drastic shift? I'm not convinced.
Yeah, but Senet, what's the message here that we take from what this says about Panyaza Lesufi? I mean, there's been so much touted about his political future, some calling it his own ambitions, but the popularity that he holds within the party, the ANC hitting 34% in the elections last year, and yet Panyaza Lesufi holding such prominence. And I'm keen to hear what this says to you when the ANC says, well, he'll continue to lead as co-convener alongside Amos Masondo. Does this strengthen or weaken Panyaza Lesufi in your view?
I don't necessarily think that it either strengthens or weakens him. I think that this is more of an opportunity for him to show that he can work with others. And I think that the person that he's paired with isn't necessarily someone that he would view as a competitor given his own political history and the fact that he has served so long. I think that he obviously, Panyaza Lesufi, has a lot of ambitions in the run-up to the 2027 ANC elective conference. And I think that the reason why the ANC has decided to keep him on could be possibly because if you remove him, it could cause fractions or factional breakouts, especially in Gauteng, a province that the ANC is not necessarily very strong in. Whether or not a lot of people agree with it, Panyaza Lesufi does tend to be quite popular within Gauteng province. And I think that as a result, you don't want to cause too much of a change in terms of that province. You're trying to have a little bit of continuity along with a lot of change as well.
Yeah, very interesting. So, Chamano earlier talked about the standout story for him, obviously being the screaming match that we saw over the past few days. And Mikateki, so I think this is where you're going to help us there with your perspective from the Institute for Global Dialogue. But I wanted to start with this because the run-up to what we saw transpiring between Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office, one could say was part of a bigger discussion. Early on in the week, Donald Trump, US President, meeting with the leader of France, Emmanuel Macron. And this is just a snippet of what came out of that discussion from the two leaders of those two countries. Take a listen.
When do you think the war will end?
I think the war will end soon.
How soon?
Within weeks.
Weeks?
Yeah.
At what price for
Don't
Ukraine?
you think so? I'd like to ask that you. I think we could end it within weeks if we're smart. If we're not smart, it'll keep going and we'll keep losing young, beautiful people that shouldn't be dying.
Well, there you have it. Donald Trump telling Emmanuel Macron and the media, Mikateki, so that he believes that we could end the war in weeks. We'll continue to lose young, beautiful people, but with the approach that he puts on the table, they're able to, he believes, end the war in weeks. And then, of course, he does sit with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. The man arrives in the U.S. and, of course, upon arriving at the White House, the U.S. president makes a comment about his dress sense as well. But eventually, when they do sit down, this is what transpires.
You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having
Not playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
I'm very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're gambling
I'm
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War
What do you-
III.
what do you
You're
think
gambling
about?
with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And
Yeah.
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
I'm
That's
with
back
all
to
respect to
you.
your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
I mean, what a moment, right? In global politics, I think anyone who was watching this, just, you know, so many reactions, and of course, various reactions that have been shared about the Ukrainian ambassador to the US as that exchange was taking place, simply burying her face in her head. But Mikateki, so help us out here. You see that moment between Zelensky and Trump. I mean, what are the thoughts that go through your mind?
Well, I feel a bit sad for developing economies for the following reasons. Not too long ago, they were under extreme pressure to take a side, right? Particularly from development partners, to choose, you know, in particular Ukraine, you know, support Ukraine in this, support you, and developing economies in the main, they've been saying, but no, we're not aligned, right? We're not going to get ourselves entangled, you know, in great power politics and great power competition, you know, because it's not in our interests. Right? The great powers are doing all of this for their interests. President Trump, you know, has repeatedly said that he's transactional. He wants, you know, a deal, you know, in Ukraine and so on. You have now European countries, you know, saying that, you know, they're going to cut development assistance to spend on defense. I don't know what they're defending against. No one has attacked Europe in the longest time, but, you know, I don't know. Maybe it's for offense and so on. But the reality is, in any event, ODAs have been declining for quite some time now, right? And, you know, it comes as no surprise. So, you know, some have been saying that, look, you know, what, you know, is happening there in this conversation between President Trump, his deputy, and President Zelensky is something that probably happens behind closed doors anyway. You know, the only thing that has happened is the doors have been opened, you know, for everybody to watch, you know, and see. Is Trump, you know, correct in, you know, the things that he's saying? Well, you know, it's anybody's, you know, guess, you know, I suppose. But there's no difference between what he's saying now and what has been in public discourse over the last, you know, 8 or so years, you know, about this, you know, big conflict.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you make there, that this is probably what the conversations look like behind closed doors, but now they're happening in front of the media. And one wonders if, you know, as J.D. Vance even started to sway the conversation towards that direction, and then Donald Trump sort of jumping on in front of the media is beneficial for Donald Trump. I mean, just talk to me about that. What's the benefit of having this play out so publicly?
Generally, those kind of conversations would take place behind closed doors, given the sensitivities, obviously, around the subject that's been discussed. I think probably, you know, for the first time, you sort of have that kind of conversation taking place in front of these global, you know, cameras, everybody really watching. But yes, I think there's a point that is made by, you know, my colleague on the other line to say this is probably what happens, you know, on a daily basis when these, you know, meetings do take place. But I think it was very unfortunate that it was happening at the time when you have invited someone, for this matter, a president. So you would sort of expect that people are sort of, you know, cordial with each other.
Yeah.
But yes, of course, the issues that were being discussed are quite important. Is Trump going to end, you know, the war within just a week from what we saw from that clip? Obviously, this has been going on for more than 3 years now. And what is really disturbing, and as I indicated even in my introduction, I just found it really somehow that this conversation, when it first started, it looked like, because if you sort of go back, it's like plays for 49 minutes, apart from the last 9 minutes.
Yes.
Right at the beginning, it looks like, a good conversation where you can sort of get something out of it. But it was just in that last 9 minutes when, the deputy president or vice president Vance, starting to sort of probe a little bit more. But I really must say, Neledi, it was quite disturbing, and I really don't know what this really means for what we have seen between Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, Dr. Zwakala, we've heard it being said a lot of the time that Trump is, one thing that he certainly is a leader that knows how to communicate with the public. And get his message out there. I mean, if ever a message is clear, I think it certainly is. And I'm keen to hear what you think that message is. I mean, there's of course the negotiation round. We want the minerals, and we've been helping you. We've had a conversation with Vladimir Putin, and so you should be thankful. Is that the key message? But is there a back-ended message that we're getting here from Trump, Dr. Zwakala?
Yeah, Trump. I've got two comments on that only. I think the less one says about President Trump, the better. Look, I'll have a bite anyway. Look, it's quite unfortunate for international relations. This may indicate some paradigm shift in global politics. What we do certainly want is the end of the war, where women and children are being killed. But as far as the aid is concerned, look, I think it's really an indictment of dependency of countries, emerging economies such as ourselves. We should at some point end the dependence syndrome of emerging economies such as South Africa. I know there'll always be global trade, correctly so, but I think it can't be correct politically where an economy as big as South Africa, the biggest in Africa, by the way, to be threatened by the states for withdrawal of funding. And I suppose the political inconvenient and untruths that are being sent by the likes of your AfriForum, they're not helping our discourse.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's and we're going to get to AfriForum in a moment. But just as we wrap up the discussion around, the global stage, so then this took place, of course, after the meeting with Donald Trump turned south, if you will. The president of Ukraine then, of course, meeting with the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer. A different tone to that discussion. Take a look.
Well, let me just say that you're very, very welcome here in Downing Street. As you heard from the cheers on the street outside, you have full backing across the United Kingdom. And we stand with you, with Ukraine, for as long as it may take. And I hope you heard some of that cheering in the street. That is the people of the United Kingdom coming out to demonstrate how much they support you, how much they support Ukraine, and our absolute determination to stand with you, unwavering determination, and to achieve what we both...
Yeah, a very different tone there, Mikateki. So Keir Starmer saying, we stand behind you. And so I think there's something to be said about, even as the European Union certainly meets, what comes out there about those discussions with the plans to support Ukraine moving forward, where that leaves the US and perhaps even ourselves. I mean, we have solid relationships for years with Russia, and then just recently our president requesting a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. So talk to us about all of those elements, Mikateki.
Well, my sister, if you consider, once again, all the narratives, that, were generated when this conflict, this crisis began, right? Of course, it began in 2014, but, the most recent, 3 years ago, or so, the narratives that were generated about, this, horrible Russia, that, the collective West has to come in and do something about it, and so on, right? It's a just, thing to do. We need to get in there, defeat Russia militarily, and so on, right? Punish Russia. In fact, they even went and called it Putin's war. Actually, Putin's war, this, Putin's war, that, is a dictator. This is about authoritarianism versus democracy, and so on and so forth. And then you suddenly have, the biggest, military in the world turning around and saying that this war should not have happened in the first place, right? Now, many have, since, suffered high energy prices, in Europe. They have suffered, significantly from, the impact of sanctions on Russian energy products, and other products, including agricultural products, and so on. Now, when you have this one partner suddenly making, a complete turnaround, saying that this shouldn't have happened in any event, it should stop now. You even have, the likes of Elon Musk, supporting ideas of the United States leaving NATO, even. Imagine what that must be sounding like to citizens, of Europe, citizens in Britain, citizens, in France, citizens in Germany, and so on. They'll probably be thinking, but so it means we suffered for nothing, right? Now, their politicians, they can't, exactly do what Trump has done. They can't afford it, right? How are they going to justify it, right? They have to carry on, find a way, their people have already suffered, quite considerably, from this. They have to find a way to, justify, why they went into it in the first place. They can't, afford to suddenly make a turnaround and say that, no, you suffered, essentially for nothing.
Yeah.
They have to defend themselves. They have to defend, all of, these moves that they're making. They are not Trump. Trump can afford to do this. He's getting away with it. He's, very decisive. He's very clear. He said beforehand that, look, he wants this thing gone. And the sound of peace, right, appeals to many, by the way.
Yeah.
No one wants, the war to be sustained. Many, including in the global south, never wanted this to happen in the first place because it shifts, again, development aid, from, where it's most needed to fund wars, right, where people die. Right? So instead of developing, it funds death, and destruction and maiming, and so on. So no one wanted this, right? So it appeals to some, when President Trump says, okay, look, we need to negotiate for peace, but this is what should have happened in the first place. In fact, there was an attempt, at signing a peace deal in Istanbul, right, in Turkey. And then suddenly, a turnaround, happened when President Johnson visited Ukraine. Something could have happened there. A compromise could have been reached there. Discussions could have gone on, and in fact, with the participation of Europe as well. But they did not want that. The narrative at the time was deliver a strategic defeat, on Russia militarily. That was what was being spoken about constantly, right? Defeat Russia militarily, not peace, not, good neighborliness, not development. No, defeat Russia militarily. That's the narrative. And now things seem to have changed. And it's a problem for everyone.
Sure. Yeah, and it's very interesting to see what happens next. But when we come back, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about South Africa's positioning with all of these global shifts. Where does that leave us? And certainly the stance that's being taken by our very own president in some issues. One of them, of course, being AfriForum and Solidarity this week heading back to Washington, D.C. to speak with the Trump administration. Sinet Solomon will help us analyze, really, how the South African government is responding to that and a lot more on the other side of this. Of course, we're taking your calls, 010-594-6010. Or send us a WhatsApp, 072-110-5584. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. Well, we continue looking back at the week that was. Keen to hear some of the stories that really stood out for you. Be sure to send us a WhatsApp if you'd like to interact with us. The number is 072-110-5584, or give us a call, 010-594-6010. We love hearing from you, getting some of the stories that really stood out and got you going, over the week that was. Let's see some of the WhatsApps. Stanley Sabaka says ANC can change people into positions, but the only thing that can give the ANC a boost is service delivery, stop crime and corruption. Stanley, let's take perhaps one more. Mr. Yan Ramakari says, dear Newsroom, the government's decision to close Paza shops will leave many communities stranded. This may lead to unrest in many unaffected areas. Allow shops to trade while they're waiting for the relevant documents. Yeah, Mr. Ramakari, thank you so much for that one. All right, we'll keep the WhatsApps coming in. But let's bring in back our panelists here. And Sinette, you can assist us with this next part of the discussion. So Lobby Group, AfriForum, and Trade Union Solidarity have, gone back to the US, to Washington, D.C. And this time they've asked for support for the Afrikaner nation within South Africa, right? Very interesting. And then, of course, the response from our very own president. I've heard from AfriForum and Solidarity. I've heard that AfriForum and Solidarity met representatives in the US and that they're doing precisely what we said as South Africans should not do. We should stop running to other countries. We should discuss our problems here and find solutions, and that in many other ways confirms our own sovereignty. It confirms our standing as a free and independent nation. The words of the president. Strong enough of a response from the president there, Sinette?
Yes, Neledi, I think that the president was quite clear and I think he was quite firm. But I also think that as a lot of South Africans have voiced over the past few weeks, I think that there's a way of dealing with grievances that you have within your own country. Firstly, I think that it was wrong to label what's happening in South Africa as an Afrikaner genocide, because we all know that's not what's happening. Secondly, if they did have concerns, especially about the expropriation bill, there are a lot of organizations that have said that they are against it and so on. There is alternative routes that you could follow. For example, you could go through the legal system, etc. And then thirdly, what was also interesting was the denial after the initial response from the US, where they were stating that they never said that there was an Afrikaner genocide. But now in the same breath, you are returning to an external party again, asking them to assist. So we, at this point, are uncertain about what exactly they mean when they say that people need to be helped and why it is that this can't be resolved internally. And I think that what the president was saying was true. I think let's resolve South African problems within the South African landscape, because I think that we have a lot of platforms, we have a lot of mechanisms in place to actually resolve this. That does not necessarily result in us questioning the sovereignty of our country.
Yeah, but we can certainly say it didn't stop AfriForum and Solidarity from going back to Washington, D.C. Dr. Zwakala, what has this done for brand South Africa?
Neledi, this is an inconvenient, falsified perception or image that's being painted about the country. But I suppose one can ask the question, why was the AfriForum entertained in the White House? But really, there's an opinion piece written by Dr. Louisa van Rijn in the Sunday Times today, an Afrikaner lady. Just go read that article. I think I won't be doing justice in trying to relay what she's saying. What she's saying essentially is AfriForum does not represent a majority of Afrikaner. The agenda that AfriForum is pushing is dangerous and divisive. So if we deviate from the ideals of President Nelson Mandela and his the people that he worked with, right in the transition of democracy, then we'll be going the right path.
Yeah.
So this race-related resonance or tribe, or whatever you call it, it's very divisive, and we're going to regress as a society.
Yeah.
So the agenda that AfriForum is pushing, it does not do brand South Africa any good, because a wrong, inaccurate picture is being painted about South Africa, and people will read what they want to read, especially externally, because it is untrue. It is untrue that the AfriForum is representing all Afrikaners.
That's an interesting point, that we've heard it a few times as well. AfriForum is not representative of all Afrikaners in the country. And then, of course, the issue of, a white genocide is misinformation that is being fed into the world. What is the role of South African journalists and storytellers in getting that right? And is our voice loud enough? And I'm keen to hear your view as well on the international media and how they are interpreting, this narrative that is being peddled around our country.
I think it's important that from a point of view of, storytelling, obviously you want to present the facts. And as we know, South Africa is a country with its own very long history. But what is this really, all about? And if it was really about the expropriation, bill, what are the dynamics? Is it something that you need to have a group of people really going outside the country? Surely there can be absolutely no doubt that the message that is being sent out there, it does not represent what this bill stands for. It does not represent what South Africa is about. There is absolutely no genocide that's going to take place here. I mean, South Africa has gone through so many, different phases in its, own challenges that we all know of. But let me also just, point out one thing that I find rather a bit strange, that how come that we have, a group that is entertained by Congress. In this case, one would expect that you would want to engage with representatives of the country. In this case, a government where you seek to try and understand what the issues are or where they stem from, to try and prevent what we have already seen. What we were speaking about earlier, the U.S. aid, what does it mean? What are the implications?
The funding cuts, yes.
You live in a country where over 5 million people are dependent on ARVs. Over and above that, there's thousands upon thousands of jobs that have just been lost. Contracts, as we all know now, there are people without jobs. So this is definitely not doing any good to the South African brand.
Yeah, of course, let's remember that the funding cuts weren't just, as announced towards this weekend, weren't just for South Africa, but various other countries as well. But an important point nonetheless. Let's take calls, 010-594-6010 to share your thoughts on our discussion, particularly the stories that stood out for you this week. Jeff is in Hammanskraal. Jeff, good evening. Thanks for calling.
Hello.
Yes, Jeff, thank you for calling. What are your thoughts?
No, I was saying these people, the lobby group.
Yes. Jeff, if your TV is on, we're going to have to let you go because then you're going to be listening to us twice. So, okay. All right. We'll take a few WhatsApps. Let's see those that have come in at this time. Let's see. We've got Lucas Madiba saying, I think AfriForum is now trying to exercise racism again and have realized that Trump is also racist like them. Lucas, thank you so much for sending in that WhatsApp. Muzibu Telezi in Boxburg says Zelensky can't afford this war and he has no choice but to work with Trump to end that unnecessary war. All right, we'll keep the WhatsApps coming in, 072-110-5584. Migateki, so let's bring you in here. What South Africa should be doing at this point to protect its public image and certainly its relations with key countries like the US, the UK, and so many more. What should our priority be at this point?
Right. Thank you for that. Firstly, just to reiterate that in their masses, in their numbers, South Africans have resolutely rejected that executive order to begin with. They've resolutely rejected it. Political parties have rejected it. Civil society has rejected it. It's this small entity that represents a few white people, that has gone out and notwithstanding, not to mention that they've been doing this, in fact, for years. They've been visiting the United States for years, saying the sort of things that they're saying. Now only, that these things are being entertained by the White House. But why are they being entertained by the White House? Some have argued that, look, this is about Israel. If you read, the entirety of the executive order, very little, actually, is spoken about the expropriation bill. There's more about South Africa's relationships with others, that is, bothersome, to the Trump administration, to the extent that, it warranted an executive order of that nature. Not to even mention that comes, just shortly after, the visit by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. Right? So in my view, it has absolutely nothing to do with our domestic politics, but has everything to do with South Africa's projection, in international affairs, outwards. That's the first point to make. The second point to make is, look, we are a developing economy that is trying very hard to regenerate industry, to build infrastructure, to resolve a whole host of development challenges. Right? We can't afford to be spending a lot of time and resources entertaining untruths, especially untruths that the whole world is aware of. Right? The whole world is aware that this is not true. They know South Africa. Many have been to South Africa. Recently, you had European ambassadors in this country doing a video in support of our G20 presidency. For instance. So the whole world actually knows about this, and they do not agree with this nonsense. That's another point to make. So we should be focusing on developing our industry. We should be focusing on developing, creating and developing partnerships for, the building, the construction of our infrastructure, the development of our tech sector, the development of our energy sector, all of these issues, that have been outlined over and over and over again. Let me give you a simple example. Right now we're dealing with the issues that the G20 has to resolve on, right? Mounting global public debt crisis, particularly for the global South. The issue of a global tax convention, for instance, so that global South can manage to recoup some money to develop for themselves, to invest in their own development. Right? You have issues of security. You have issues. The reform of the global financial architecture, and so on and so forth. A whole host of problems that we need to be focusing our attention on. We want to develop as the global South, and we can't be distracted by such things that the whole world knows is nonsensical.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take calls as well. We've got Ulifile in Mafikeng. Ulifile, good evening. Thank you so much for calling.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening, sir. Talk to us.
Good evening. I wonder whether this group understands the word Afrikaner, because Afrikaner means African. That makes me as well an Afrikaner. So I wonder whether they understand the meaning of the word Afrikaner. Number two, at what stage did they become Afrikaners? Because they used to identify themselves as Europeans, or in Afrikaans, blankes. And all of a sudden they are Afrikaners. How did they get it right? At what stage did they become Afrikaners then, or Africans? Because Afrikaner and African is the same thing. That makes me and you Afrikaner as well.
Yeah, Ulifile, that's an interesting one. This is where this conversation takes us, though, around, the AfriForum, the organization AfriForum and Solidarity speaking for the protection of the culture of Afrikaners in the country. Somehow it's seemingly starting a conversation of us and them in South Africa. We're taking more calls. Richard in Johannesburg. Richard, good evening.
So, thank you.
Thank you so much for calling. Go ahead, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead. You're live.
Yes, I just wanted to say. Yes, I just want to say that we need a diplomatic friendship with America. So whatever what has happened about the Trump it should not deter us and take us away from understanding that since the dawn of civilization, America has been here in South Africa especially. So there have been people who have been helping the world. So we cannot stop respecting America because of Trump. We need to understand that there are some things that can happen that can make friends to have different opinions sometimes. But Trump is going to be there for only a few years. Another president is going to come. We need to respect America and then restore our diplomatic relationship with America and stop being trying to be like we need another friendship, you see?
Yeah. All right, Richard, thank you so much for calling in.
We need to respect each other.
100%. Thank you so much for calling in. Your insights always welcome. 0721105584. That's where, unfortunately, we are out of time. But thank you so much to our panelists this evening who has helped us look back on the week that was. Chamano Makadi, who is SANEF's deputy chairperson, Sanet Solomon, who is a political analyst, Mikatekiso Kubai, who is a senior researcher with the Institute for Global Dialogue, and Dr. M.K. Swagala, political party brand analyst. We're back in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. All right, let's take a look at some of the WhatsApps that have come in as we wrapped up our panel on the week that was on the news rundown. Simo says, why is the Human Rights Commission not opening a case against AfriForum as what they lead to people losing their jobs, which amounts to violation of people's human rights, people living with HIV and their families are left homeless. Simo, thank you so much for sending in that message. Peter says, hi, Neledi, with regards to the so-called AfriForum solidarity movement, their decision to go to Trump doesn't start now, and therefore let the president allow them to go press charges of treason and ban all of them who are in their support. Peter there in Hoopstad in the Free State. Keep them coming in.